Russell Wilson, 10-time Pro Bowler, second team All-Pro, Super Bowl champion, and one of the greatest deep ball throwers in NFL history.
Again, a bootleg. Step and fire. Wilson, separation, touchdown Rice.
Russell Wilson has officially retired from the NFL. Now, with a resume like that over a 14-year NFL career, one would assume that the Hall of Fame discussion would be pretty straightforward. But in Russell Wilson's case, it isn't. For most of his career, Wilson was viewed as one of the best quarterbacks in football. He was the king of the moonball, the quarterback who could drop a pass perfectly into a receiver's hands 50 yards downfield better than almost anybody we've ever seen. You could argue that Russell Wilson was a version of Patrick Mahomes before Patrick Mahomes got to the NFL. He was football's Houdini.
Surveys, nowhere to go, and back in the end zone, touchdown!
His legs, his scrambling ability, the way he could escape pressure, extend plays, and somehow create something out of absolutely nothing. It was unlike anything most NFL fans had seen before. Before quarterbacks like Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, and Caleb Williams entered the league, there was Russell Wilson. He is still the only quarterback in NFL history with over 40,000 passing yards and over 5,000 rushing yards. But ever since his departure from Seattle, Wilson may have played himself out of the Hall of Fame conversation, being chewed out by Sean Payton on the sideline and by teammates, getting benched in Denver, being booed by the entire MetLife Stadium of Giants fans. Those are some of the final memories that people now associate with Russell Wilson. But before the boos, before being benched, before Sean Payton ripped him into a new one on national television, how good was Russell Wilson really? To understand Russell Wilson's journey, we need to go back to where it all started in Richmond, Virginia. Wilson was a multi-sport athlete growing up, playing football, basketball, and baseball. But football was where he truly stood out. As a high school quarterback, he totaled over 8,000 yards in his high school career, and over his final 2 seasons alone, he had 107 total touchdowns. He was an all-state quarterback, and he won not 1, not 2, but 3 state title championships. Now, oddly enough though, despite all of that success as a high school quarterback, Russell Wilson was ranked as a 2-star recruit. The biggest concerns coaches and scouts had with him was his size. Scouts believed he was too short and too small, and that his game would not translate to the next level. Some schools even wanted him to switch positions and play defensive back. Only 2 Division I schools offered him a scholarship, Duke and NC State, and ultimately Wilson chose NC State because they believed in him as a quarterback. When Wilson arrived at NC State as a freshman, he was a redshirt freshman, but ultimately won the starting quarterback job. But it was his sophomore season where he put the country and all college football on notice. Not only did he account for over 3,200 yards from scrimmage and 35 total touchdowns, but he protected the football at an elite level. Russell Wilson threw 325 consecutive passes without an interception, setting an NCAA record at the time. In his final season at NC State, he threw for 3,500 yards and 28 touchdowns, while adding another 400 rushing yards and 9 touchdowns on the ground. Meanwhile, while he was doing all this in college football, he was also generating some buzz in baseball. So much so that the Colorado Rockies selected him in the 2010 MLB draft, leading him to participate in spring training. Once Wilson was done with the spring training for the Rockies, he returned to NC State, but things had changed. They no longer wanted him, and his coaches told him to go focus on baseball because his size was not going to translate at the next level in the NFL. So that led Russell Wilson to transferring to Wisconsin to finish out his college career. The move turned out to be one of the best decisions he could have made. He led the Badgers to an 11-3 record, helped them become the inaugural Big Ten champions, and also earned a trip to the Rose Bowl. During the season, Wilson threw for 3,100 yards, 33 touchdowns, and just 4 interceptions, while continuing to produce production with his legs. To this point, he had done everything possible to improve his NFL draft stock going into the 2012 NFL draft. But one concern still followed him everywhere: his height and his size. Even John Gruden pointed it out during the pre-draft process. Despite the production, NFL teams were focused on the projection, and history had shown that shorter quarterbacks in the NFL rarely succeed. aside from, the GOAT himself, Drew Brees. As a result, Wilson fell all the way to the 3rd round of the 2012 NFL Draft. His weight finally ended at pick 75 when the Seattle Seahawks selected him. And honestly, this was a little bit of a surprise, because the Seahawks had spent some money in free agency signing quarterback Matt Flynn to a 3-year, $26 million contract to compete with Tavarius Jackson. Can we just talk about for a second the drastic changes the quarterback market has gone through? Matt Flynn with a 3-year, $26 million. Anyway, I'm getting carried away. So this was a surprise to many people. Not only the fact that they drafted a quarterback, but drafted an undersized quarterback viewed as a project made it even more shocking. Once Russell Wilson arrived in Seattle, he had to compete against 2 veteran quarterbacks for the starting job, guys who had NFL experience already. And somehow, some way, Russell Wilson won the starting job. Let's just put it this way, many teams draft a quarterback, let's just say round 1, and they decide to let them sit and learn for a while before they even let them play. For example, Drake May did not play immediately. Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, those guys did not start immediately. Sometimes teams like to draft players and then let them sit and develop for a few years, but in this case for Russell Wilson, that was not what was happening. Seattle named Russell Wilson the Week 1 starter for the 2012 NFL season. The undersized 3rd round project pick had beaten out 2 established veterans. For context, the Arizona Cardinals just drafted Carson Beck in the 3rd round. That'd be like if he beat out both Jacoby Brissett and Gardner Minshew and was ready to be the starter week 1. Not exactly the same, but I'm just trying to get the point across that how crazy it is that a 3rd round pick quarterback, let alone an undersized quarterback, won the starting job for week 1. After they announced this, head coach Pete Carroll said Russell Wilson was just so prepared and he didn't even seem like a typical year 1 rookie, which is what led to them making him the starting quarterback. And that decision became one of the most important moves in Seahawks history, second to none to obviously drafting him. Wilson's rookie season was an enormous success. He threw for over 3,100 yards and 26 touchdowns, tying the NFL rookie record for most passing touchdowns in a season at the time. He also added 500 rushing yards and 4 rushing touchdowns, and made his first Pro Bowl. More importantly, he led the Seahawks to an 11-5 record, their first winning season since 2007. Not only did they have a winning record, but they made the playoffs. Not only did they make the playoffs, but they won a playoff game versus the Washington Commanders, who were the Redskins at the time, against his other fellow rookie quarterback, RG3. The future looked bright in Seattle after the rookie quarterback led them to the divisional round, and Russell Wilson got even better in year 2. The Seahawks finished 13-3. Of course, the Legion of Boom and Marshawn Lynch played a huge factor into that success, but nonetheless, Russell Wilson remained extremely efficient as a passer. He earned himself another Pro Bowl selection and became the first quarterback in NFL history to post a passer rating over 100 in each of his first 2 seasons. Seattle earned the number 1 seed that year, and in the divisional round they beat the Saints. And then in the championship, they beat the 49ers, their divisional opponents. And all of a sudden, Russell Wilson was headed to the Super Bowl in just his 2nd NFL season. He joined an impressive list of quarterbacks to accomplish this in only their 2nd season, including Dan Marino, Tom Brady, Ben Roethlisberger, and Kurt Warner. And then came the Super Bowl. Seattle absolutely dominated Peyton Manning and the Broncos from start to finish. You could definitely say it was more of a defensive performance from the Seahawks than anything, shutting down one of the best offenses in NFL history, but nonetheless, Russell Wilson did what he was supposed to do, got points on the board, and didn't make any mistakes. He got them to the Super Bowl and won the Seahawks their first Super Bowl in franchise history. Going into year 3, the dreaded Super Bowl hangover never came. Russell Wilson continued that same success that he had the year before. Seattle went 12-4 the following season and earned the number 1 seed once again. Wilson's passing production remained steady from the year before, but his rushing capabilities reached another level. He reached a career-high 850 rushing yards and 6 touchdowns on the ground. And after beating the Carolina Panthers in a divisional round where he put up some pretty productive numbers, Seattle faced the Green Bay Packers in the NFC Championship game. Russell Wilson was not at his best in this game. He threw 4 interceptions versus the Green Bay Packers at home. It was an ugly game for 3.5 quarters, but when the game was on the line, Russell Wilson delivered. He led one of the most improbable comebacks, I think, in NFL history, and gave us one of the greatest plays that we've seen in the postseason.
Wilson toward the end zone. It is caught. Seattle's going to the Super Bowl.
Just 3 years into his NFL career, Russell Wilson had made the postseason 3 times and was on his way to his 2nd Super Bowl. He had already taken down Peyton Manning, and now it was time for him to take on Tom Brady. In that Super Bowl, Seattle had a 24-14 lead with about 8 minutes left in the game. Then, Tom Brady did what Tom Brady always seemed to do. He brought New England back. Russell Wilson, though, responded with a clutch drive of his own to help lead the Seahawks to win the game, completing multiple passes over 30 yards in the final drive, moving Seattle all the way down to the 1-yard line. And then, we all know what happened next. They were 1 yard away, but instead of handing it off to Marshawn Lynch, for whatever the hell reason it was, they decided to throw it, and Russell Wilson was picked off by Malcolm Butler, and they lost the Super Bowl. Even with this though, Russell Wilson did not have the Super Bowl hangover. He recovered from that loss pretty quickly, and it helped that he signed a 40-year contract extension worth up to $87 million. And again, it's insanely wild how different the quarterback market was about 10 years ago than it is today. 4 years, $87 million would be a steal in today's NFL. In 2015, Russell Wilson threw for over 4,000 yards for the first time in his NFL career, and also threw for 34 passing touchdowns. But the Seahawks roster was just beginning to change from that Super Bowl team. The Legion of Boom was starting to age, and some of the players who were once at their peak were no longer there and declining. Seattle, though, still finished with a 10-6 record and made the playoffs, but lost in the divisional round to the Carolina Panthers. The following year, Marshawn Lynch retired, and now the offense was completely dependent on Russell Wilson and his arm. He responded to that though by throwing for 4,200 yards, the most in his NFL career. Seattle still made the playoffs at 10-5-1, but once again exited in the divisional round. And there was growing concerns that Seattle's championship window had officially closed, and the 2017 season only reinforced those concerns. Despite Russell Wilson's 34 touchdown passes leading the NFL in 2017, the Seahawks missed the playoffs for the first time during his tenure. They still finished 9-7, which is a pretty solid record, but the team and roster overall just wasn't good enough to get into the playoffs. What's even crazier about that 2017 season is Russell Wilson accounted for 37 of the Seahawks' 38 offensive touchdowns. Only one other player scored a touchdown on the Seahawks that season, not relying on Russell Wilson. Russell Wilson threw 34 touchdowns and also ran for 3 touchdowns. Only one other player had a rushing touchdown, which is incredibly insane. Wilson quite literally had the team on his back. And additionally, he led the team in rushing yards with about 500. So it's just safe to say that 2017 team was a complete and utter disaster, and Russell Wilson was carrying them to wins that they probably shouldn't have won. And Russell Wilson continued to play at this elite level. From 2018 through 2020, Seattle made the playoffs every single season. The problem was though, they couldn't get over the playoff hump. 2 wildcard exits and a divisional round loss were all they had to show for it. Meanwhile though, Russell Wilson was still remaining an outstanding football player. He had multiple 4,000-yard seasons during this time frame and threw for 40 touchdowns in another season. You could argue he would have won MVP in 2019 if Lamar Jackson hadn't put together a historic season. Then in 2020, in the first half of the season, Russell Wilson was leading the NFL in yards and touchdowns and looked like the MVP frontrunner until things started to just slow down and Aaron Rodgers overtook with an efficient NFL season. At this point, Russell Wilson had made 8 Pro Bowls in 9 seasons, missed the playoffs only 1 time, and never had a losing record. But heading into 2021, frustration was starting to build. Russell Wilson wasn't necessarily happy because he wasn't thrilled with some of the philosophies within the offensive coaching staff, and he never officially requested a trade, but he did say that if he was to be traded, there were a few teams that he would like to go to and prefer, including the Jets, the Dolphins, the Raiders, the Bears, and the Saints. Despite the controversy though and everything like that, Wilson still played for the Seahawks in 2021, although it was a little subpar and disappointing to what he typically does. A broken finger caused him to miss 3 games and clearly affected his ability to throw the football. Seattle finished that season 7-10, their worst season since 2011. The Seahawks had already traded away significant draft capital for Jamal Adams and needed to begin their rebuilding process, and that ultimately led to discussions with teams around the NFL and led to one of the biggest trades in NFL history, sending Russell Wilson to the Denver Broncos. And before the video continues, I would appreciate it if you took 5 seconds to like the video, subscribe, and hype it up. We're trying to get to 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help and support to get there. Helping these videos reach a wider audience can help grow the channel, and only about 13% of you who watch these videos are actually subscribed, so help support the channel. All right, let's get back in the video.
Blockbuster. After weeks of negotiations and one of the largest trades in NFL history, the Seattle Seahawks and Denver Broncos have agreed to terms on a deal involving Super Bowl winning quarterback Russell Wilson.
So Russell Wilson was on his way to Denver, and in return, the Seattle Seahawks got 2 first-round picks, 2 second-round picks, Drew Lock, Noah Fant, Shelby Harris, and a 4th-round selection. Seattle got a massive haul, and not only did the Broncos give up that much for Russell Wilson, but they gave him a massive contract extension on top of his already existing contract. Russell Wilson was given a 5-year deal worth $245 million. The Broncos had spent years stuck in quarterback purgatory. Wilson was supposed to save the franchise. He was supposed to make them relevant again. Instead, things fell apart immediately. Poor coaching paired with poor play from Russell Wilson was the formula for disaster. Starting off the season, fans were counting down the play clock at home because the offense simply couldn't get lined up and snap the ball on time. Russell Wilson was missing wide open receivers to win the game on primetime, and his teammates were visibly frustrated. Denver averaged just about 16.9 points per game and fielded one of the worst offenses in the NFL in 2022. And that season became even more of a disaster after they got whooped by the Rams on Christmas and Nathaniel Hackett was fired the day after. So in that offseason, Denver needed someone to come in and fix Russell Wilson alongside their culture. Their culture was losing. They needed someone to come in and flip it immediately, and that someone was Sean Payton. The Broncos traded for the Super Bowl winning head coach using the 1st-round pick they acquired from the Miami Dolphins in the Bradley Chubb trade. And if anyone could get Russell Wilson back on track, it was going to be Sean Payton. And one of Sean Payton's first moves was eliminating some of the stuff that felt like special treatment to Russell Wilson, including a personal office and outside trainers being inside the facility. Sean Payton eliminated that immediately. That first year under Sean Payton did not start well at all. They started off 0-3, which included that 70-point game against the Dolphins where the Broncos were completely embarrassed. But eventually things did begin to start to turn around. Russell Wilson was starting to cook. They won 5 straight games, doing a lot of really efficient things. Wilson showed flashes of vintage Russell Wilson, including an incredible touchdown pass against the Bills on Monday Night Football.
Wilson sets up and spinning around to the back of the end zone. Sutton.
But it simply just wasn't enough. After that 5-game winning streak, things just started to crumble back again for the Denver Broncos. Russell Wilson was chewed up by Sean Payton during a massive loss to the Detroit Lions. And then on Christmas Eve, after a loss to the Patriots, he was benched. And shortly after that, the Denver Broncos released him, and the result, an $85 million dead money cap hit, the largest in NFL history at the time. The Broncos were literally paying Russell Wilson to play somewhere else. For the first time in his career, Russell Wilson was a free agent, which resulted in him signing with the Pittsburgh Steelers on a veteran minimum contract. He entered training camp competing with Justin Fields, but a calf injury caused him to miss the first 6 games of the season. When he took over as a starter though, the Steelers were 4-2, but when Russell Wilson did take over, he actually did play pretty well. The Steelers won 4 straight games with Russell Wilson and improved to 8-2. Russell Wilson wasn't the superstar he once was, but he managed games effectively and avoided mistakes, doing exactly what he needed to do. And when the Pittsburgh Steelers needed him to step up and carry the offense, he still had those type of moments, like against the Bengals when he threw for 435 yards and 3 touchdowns and a 44-38 victory. Unfortunately though, that season ended relatively poorly for Russell Wilson and the Steelers. They went on a 4-game losing streak to end the regular season, not scoring more than 20 points in any of them. Then in the playoffs, in his first playoff game since 2020, Russell Wilson committed a costly fumble, which contributed to a 28-14 loss to the Ravens. Despite an overall decent season from Wilson, the Steelers decided to move on, and Russell Wilson became a free agent yet again. And after visiting with the Browns, he ended up signing with the New York Giants, who also signed Jameis Winston and ended up drafting Jackson Dart, which meant that Russell Wilson had very minimal amount of time as the starter. When a team drafts a quarterback in the first round, that means the veteran who's in there has a limited amount of time. And his first 2 games couldn't have been completely more different. Week 1 was rough, no touchdowns, less than 50% completion percentage. But then in week 2, we got a glimpse of vintage Russell Wilson.
Wilson protected, heaving one, wants Neighbors, Malik Neighbors, touchdown Giants! He dropped it in the bucket from 48!
That moon ball was back, and he hit Malik Neighbors for a touchdown that was nearly a game winner, but ultimately didn't even matter. Russell Wilson, though, did throw for 450 yards, but couldn't quite get the win, and after a loss to Kansas City on primetime, he was benched in favor of Jackson Dart and even Jameis Winston at times. Things got ugly. Fans at MetLife Stadium booed him whenever he stepped onto the field, and from that point forward, Russell Wilson never started another game. And that brings us to now. Russell Wilson has officially retired from the NFL. This comes despite him saying that he wanted to play until he was 40 years old and that he still had some gas left in the tank.
It was funny because I was talking to somebody the other day about, my career, and I feel like, I've been in a heavyweight fight. It's been 14 rounds, and I feel like I've won 11 of them, and I feel like I've lost maybe the last couple, but it doesn't mean I won't win 15 and 16. And so that's kind of been my mentality.
That's kind of a bar. That is kind of a bar. The old school heavyweight, the rounds would go up to what, 15? What is left in the tank for Russell Wilson? How much longer do you want to play this game?
Yeah, I want to play a few more years for sure. I think for me, I've always had the vision of getting to 40 at least. I think the game is different.
It was revealed that Russell Wilson, when he had a visit with the Jets, had a contract offer on the table, but he would have been the backup to Geno Smith, which, what's the irony in that? Instead of continuing to play football, Russell Wilson accepted a television analyst role with CBS Sports, filling the position previously held by Matt Ryan. And honestly, I don't blame him for choosing to do TV instead of going to the Jets. The final few years of Russell Wilson's career were undeniably disappointing, but they shouldn't erase what he accomplished in Seattle in the early portions of his career. At his peak, he was one of the most dangerous players in football, a quarterback who could beat you with his arms, his legs, creativity, and his mentality. A player who probably would have been viewed as a Hall of Famer had he retired as a Seahawk in 2021. But now that conversation is a little bit more complicated. But now the discussion of whether or not Russell Wilson should be allowed into the Hall of Fame is a whole nother complicated discussion. I will say this though, Russell Wilson has definitely helped pave the way for players like Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, and Caleb Williams, who have that more mobility type of style to their game. That's something Russell Wilson did quite well in an era of pocket passers, which is what made him so special. So how good was Russell Wilson really? At his peak, he was a consistent top 5 to top 7 quarterback in the NFL year after year. A player who elevated the roster around him and carried teams that often lacked elite offensive talent. But as he got older and lost some of that mobility that made him so dangerous, his game changed dramatically, likely due because of his height, and he couldn't quite make the throws and see things the way he used to. Ultimately, that decline shortened his NFL career sooner than he probably wanted, but that doesn't mean he didn't have a successful NFL career. And while Russell Wilson may have not gotten the ending he envisioned, for nearly a decade, he was one of the most exciting quarterbacks the NFL had seen ever. Thanks for tuning into the Cash Football Channel, the best place for casuals like us to talk about the NFL. Let me know your thoughts on Russell Wilson's career down in the comments below. Does he deserve to get into the Hall of Fame? That's the big question here. Make sure to like the video, subscribe, hype it up, help support the channel. We're trying to reach 20,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and I need your help and support to get there. I'm Kaj. I'll catch you next time. Have a good one.